Siveza iqiniso sivuselela ukuthembeka.
We will now be engaging Tutaleni Asino, who is an associate professor at the Oklahoma State University. Tutaleni's areas of research, writing, and presentations revolve around the diffusion of innovations in teaching and learning, mobile learning, and design for mobile devices. His Twitter bio actually says that I really like mobiles. He's been in the diaspora for quite a while now, being between Namibia and the US of A, and he's also the founder of the Namibia House on Clubhouse. So no surprise that he's advocating today for Clubhouse being a more human place on the internet. Tutaleni, thank you so much for joining us, and it's over to you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you find yourself. All right, everybody still seeing my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Fantastic. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this beautiful conversation around the future of journalism education and its how it is impacted by different tools. As was said earlier, my name is Tutaleni Asino. I'm a Namibian who is currently here at Oklahoma State University, but I'm coming to this conversation through the lens of Clubhouse, where I am the founder of the Namibia House Club. So just a little bit of contextualization of how I come to this space. Clubhouse is seen as something that sort of blew out of nowhere. But for me, as someone who studies innovation for a living, I always come from this space that innovations come from a need or from needs. And I think it's through that lens that we need to find out about Clubhouse and why it became so popular so fast. So I have few slides here that I'm going to go through, and then hopefully from there we can engage in conversation. So Clubhouse, just a little quick history. For those who do not know what Clubhouse is basically an audio only application that first was available on iPhone and then became available widely on Android devices. It was initially designed for podcasting under the name Talk Show. It rebranded as Clubhouse and officially released for the iOS operating system in March 2020. And of course, that aligned with the horrible time that we were going through with COVID. And I think because of that, it serves a need that we were all having around that time, which also led to its massive growth. So what made Clubhouse a success? I think part of what made Clubhouse a success was that people were in isolation and people needed information. People needed a way to connect, and people needed a space to not be alone. And they needed a place that was somewhat safe, where they can share their expertise and also obtain knowledge. So in the context of Namibia specifically, what made Clubhouse, what brought about the Namibia House and Clubhouse? So for us, this was really simple. I was driven by one primary motive, really. Because I have been involved in the space of emerging technologies, I've always noticed that Namibia specifically, and to a large extent Africa broadly, tends to be the last places recognized in these emerging spaces. So I got onto Clubhouse, and there were all these different spaces that were already being taken up. And there was no Namibia club. So there was Zambia House, there was Nigeria House, and so forth. And I was like, wait a minute, we need a space here for Namibians as well, so that we're not the last people who are coming onto this club. We started with about 6 people or so. and now it's well over 12,000 people who are in that space. And really what was coming up here was that Namibians who were spread out all around the world and also within Namibia were looking for a space to just connect. And I think to some extent, Twitter has sort of become a bit of a challenge where it can also be a toxic place for some people. And Clubhouse, because of its newness and because it was a controlled space, was able to serve as that place for people to be able to gather. We started with about 6 people who were just spread around trying to engage in multiple conversation, and it grew much bigger. So for us, our need was really a desire to connect and a desire to take up space. So we have had multiple sessions that came up on this as a result. So if you can look at this, and I know that the screen's a little bit small here, but we have a variety of topics coming from people who are interested in financial matters, for technology matters, traditional issues, medicine, and things of that nature. And all of these conversations were not being had in this format. And also the speakers that we were having were not the kind of speakers that anyone could just walk up to and talk to on the street. So it became a space where everyone, regardless of who you are in the front row seat to be able to have these conversations with different people. So what made the Namibia House Club a success? And I'm going to tie all of these to journalism education. I think for us, one of the things that became important is that we tap into a need for information, and specifically around COVID, because there was so much misinformation coming around as it relates to COVID, that we were a group that also consisted of medical professions. So we're able to then actually have experts who were also leading the vaccine drives in the country. So they were able to come onto the platform and then really explain what's happening. They were able to explain about vaccines and all things of that nature. There was a need for us for togetherness because of all of these isolation during different lockdowns. So the app serves that need. There was a need for different explanations, right? People were getting different medical information, not just around COVID, but everything from, reproductive health and anything else. There was a need for safe space where someone can come and ask questions that might be seem dumb in one context, but still need to be answered nonetheless. There was a need for reliable information because, again, people were peddling a lot of lies around, especially things like COVID vaccines. So we needed to tackle that. A need for clarification on important matters. So, for example, the genocide reparations that Germany was engaged with. A lot of clarification around those issues. A lot of need for explanation from expert. That was also needed there as well. But really, for us, I think one of the biggest thing here was that people needed access to those who they deemed inaccessible. So, for example, one of the big sessions that we had was when the First Lady and the President contracted COVID, and there was a massive uproar in the country about, well, okay, why weren't they vaccinated? And we were able to get the First Lady to come on and have a conversation around vaccines, around why she wasn't vaccinated, and have that explanation. That's a way of getting people access to certain people who are inaccessible. So for me, as far as the potential for Clubhouse for journalism, which I have seen here, is that I think for me, in some way, the fundamentals remain the same as far as it relates to good journalism. But what Clubhouse allows for is for potential and possibility to dig deeper in issues, to create exclusive follow-up to events and popular stories, and to again address this issue of accessibility, because when you become inaccessible to the very people that you're trying to inform, then they also become inaccessible to you. So again, for me, as far as the implications here for journalism, I think the tools for me may change, but the core of what really good journalism is remain the same, right? I was a communication student in the 90s when the internet was blowing up, right? There was a lot of tools around multimedia technologies, a lot of challenges about this being the end of journalism, because now everybody will be able to report and so forth. But that didn't change, right? For me, journalism is very much like the field of education broadly. We always think that every time a new tools come about, that they're going to replace teachers, right? One of the stories that I love is that Thomas Edison in the early 1900s claimed that film is going to be able to replace teachers, because you can just put in a film and be able to teach people that way. Of course, 100 years have passed since then, and teachers are still standing strong. The same arguments have been made around journalism since probably, I don't know how long ago, that journalism are going to be replaced by all these emerging spaces. But that hasn't changed. We still need those 5 W's and 1 H that we have been taught in fundamentals of journalism classes. Those are still going to be remaining the same. I think for me, the space that Clubhouse provides is not necessarily a threat to journalism, but I think it's an extension. It's a possibility and a space for the field to grow a bit more. As it relates to journalism education specifically, I think the fundamentals are still really, really important, right? My first web design class, when I thought that I was going to go into journalism focusing specifically on multimedia, we were being taught about coding for websites using notepads. And then new applications came in that you can just drag and drop things onto your page to create a website. And then what ended up happening is that as time went on, you realize that if you don't have someone who understands the very basic of HTML coding, for example, no matter how simple of a tool that you have them use to create a website, they are inevitably going to get stuck, right? So for me, if you don't have somebody who has the very fundamental of good writing, as an example, of how to tell a story, of how to inform, I think you're going to end up with someone who just has the fancy tools without the ability to really use it fully. So again, I know that I ran through that fast, but I was hoping that this will just give us a bit of a context to talk about this, rather than me sitting here lecturing to everybody. I just wanted to give a little bit of a context here, and the context for me here is that Clubhouse provides a lot of different opportunities, but as far as journalism education is concerned, I think those tools are always going to change. I think I came into the call at the end of a conversation where he was saying that there's always new emerging tools coming out. And I think that is really the same, that today's Clubhouse, tomorrow is going to be some virtual reality or augmented reality application. But the core and the fundamental of what makes good journalism, the training on how to inform, the valuing of truth, their ability to tell a story effectively, their ability to uncover is going to always be the most important thing for me when it comes to journalism and when it comes to journalism education broadly. So I'm going to pause here, and hopefully with that we can move on to just having a conversation.
Thank you so much, Tutaleni. So the floor is open now for the participants if you'd like to pose some questions to Tutaleni. I actually have a question to start with. My question is, how sustainable a space such as Clubhouse, really is? It's a platform, yes, that allows for the dissemination of information through conversations. But how are the masses assured that the information coming forth is factual? So yes, it's an innovative and fun platform, but is it trustworthy?
I think that's a really good question because that became a massive issue at the beginning. Because you were having a lot of people coming in proclaiming to be expert in all type of things. To this day, I think every single day I get somebody coming in talking to me about cryptocurrency. And all they have really done is read a Wikipedia page on what cryptocurrency is, right? We had massive rooms of people coming in telling all type of informations around COVID vaccines when we start with the Namibia House. And luckily we have doctors in the space who are able to push back and say, no, this is not really what the truth is. So as far as reliability of a space for truth information, that is incredibly challenging. Because similar to the benefit of the World Wide Web is that many people can get on and say what they want. But that's also the disadvantage, that many people can get on and say whatever they want. So I think in all social media spaces, a lot of these spaces end up having to self-police, where the experts end up coming in and checking and say, no, this is not really what is happening here. But you have, I think part of it is also teaching the rest of us about information literacy, being able to distinguish between what's truth and what's not. But any platform where anyone can get on is beneficial for the democratization of information, but it's also very ripe for misinformation at the same exact time.
Follow-up question, I think, in terms of Nina really talking about the supply side and the factual validity that comes along with restoring trust. Places like Clubhouse, it seems like one of the things that one of the corporate and investor head of Netflix said is, one thing to remember about digital spaces is that it requires not just the skill, so that in this context, the journalistic skills that are fundamental that we've had, but it also requires the tools in order for you to have access to it, in order for you to have access to the information that's available, in order for you to have access to the available information and you utilizing it in a way that creates ultimately political stability, ensures like upward mobility. So if we're looking at this as a private good versus a public good, my question is, how do we ensure greater engagement in terms of restoring trust, not just amongst what might seem as an elite group of people that are engaging on particular issues, but how do we ensure a greater, broader based involvement in these platforms that are traditionally perceived as only being accessible to the privileged?
That's a really good question, Patrick, because it's something that we dealt with a lot at the beginning of Clubhouse, especially because initially it was available only on the iPhone. So at the onset, people were like, no, this is a space for just privileged people, because an iPhone costs a lot of money and not everybody is going to be able to access that space, right? And then it kept moving to it moved on to Android and so on, and then it allowed for people to be able to record sessions, to be able to post on other places, to share on different platforms. I think for me, I'm looking at your question from an innovation standpoint. All innovation really start off from a smaller group and spread to the masses, and this is sort of the very core of what diffusion of innovation theory tells us, right? And I think often the cost factor is what we get stuck on, where we say, well, this thing is going to be too expensive, so it limits people from it. And inevitably, as we keep going on further and further, it becomes accessible because the cost factors go down. But I think as we continue to look at how all these emerging spaces, all these tools impact and influence us, we need to never forget that there is such a thing as a digital divide, right? When I was growing up as a child in northern Namibia, yeah, we have the radio at home, but not everybody in my village had the opportunity of being able to afford the batteries to power that radio. So we have always had these contexts of where people are not able to reach, right? I remember still, because Namibia was not independent at the time, we often had to wait for even up to a month to get a Namibian newspaper delivered to us, right? Because it just wasn't accessible to us, because that information wasn't flowing all the way to us that way. So there's always going to be that inaccessibility level, regardless of the platform that is. So from the prospect of Clubhouse, what we have usually said, especially when we started off, even when it was only an iPhone, is that, okay, you know what? If we are 50 of us in the room who are talking about this, and we are the one who are in the room, we now have a responsibility when we get out of that room to share that information much more broadly. Not everybody is going to be able to get on this platform, but we're always connected to the people in our community, and we have a responsibility to be able to share that. But I think the digital divide is real, and it is going to manifest itself in every type of technological innovation that we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I think for me, just to do a follow up in terms of maybe we can talk a little bit about the effects on journalism from such a space. What's the relationship between a space like Clubhouse, and how do journalists interact there? How do you use the information between that and whether it's traditional or new media spaces? But where's the real engagement that comes from the conversation, and does it enhance the ability to tell the truth for journalists? Does it help them restore trust by saying, I might be reporter X and I can use a further engagement on Clubhouse with the article that I wrote? How does it, directly link to not just, obviously in the COVID context, it also medical professionals, but how do journalists maximize Clubhouse?
I think for me, the biggest benefit for Clubhouse as it relates to journalism is to provide for follow-up, right? When I pick up, let's say, a newspaper, or when I listen to a story, it's very finite, right? The news segment has maybe 3 minutes, right? And you move on to the next one. The story on the paper has certain few words, and then you move on to the next one. I don't have an ability to follow up. I really hope that more journalists will be able to get on this space and say, hey, you know what? Let's maybe review the stories of or a week wrap up of what happened in the news, and have the people who have reported on certain events come in and actually share further information. And on the Namibia House Club, we have done some of that. We have had, for example, Chinovene from the Namibian come in and explain certain information. I have interviewed the editor for New Era to be able to ask follow-up about issues that are happening in the country, and just really to be able to get more in depth. I think that's one of the the biggest things that this place, Clubhouse, affords an opportunity to be able to engage further. I think sometimes when we don't always have accessibility to the people who are reporting. We don't always have access to the people who are reporting the stories. And I think Clubhouse is one of those spaces where you can come in and say, you know what, let's talk a little bit further about this story. Let's do a little bit of a follow-up. Maybe some of the information that could not necessarily fit onto the page of that story and look a little bit further. So I think really the other part for me is I hope journalists do not surrender the spaces like just Clubhouse or even Twitter to other people, because I think there's a space for them there to be able to really tell their stories in a much more creative way. There's no reason why you couldn't also start up a news segment on Clubhouse as well. So for example, in the Namibia House, we have what we call the breakfast show every morning at 7 local time. And that's just someone who goes through and tells about the headlines from around the world. Just say, okay, this is what's happening around the world. If you want to read further, go pick up this newspaper, go here and so forth. It'll be great if you have a journalist come on to a space like that and actually also able to give information as well. So I don't see this, perhaps I'm just too much of an optimist, I don't see this as a competition from traditional journalists. I see this as a complement to what is already happening. If people who are innovative journalists are able to seize it and really maximize its benefit.
Tutaleni, Gregory had a question for you in the chat box. He was asking, what's the difference between Clubhouse and WhatsApp? And before you answer that, Patrick, perhaps there were two other questions and a statement made in the chat box as well. So once Tutaleni is done answering, you perhaps can filter those through for me too. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, I see this. What's the difference between Clubhouse and a WhatsApp group? I think the biggest difference is what Clubhouse is much more synchronous. I think WhatsApp group tend to be a little bit more asynchronous. You post a message and maybe somebody might respond back to you right away, or somebody might respond to you, an hour later, or if you are absent-minded like myself, you might forget to respond for another week, and have somebody yell at you for blue ticking them for a whole week. But I think Clubhouse is a much more synchronous space where you can engage in real-time conversation. It's really like being live on the radio, having a radio call-in show where you're talking to a live person and being able to engage at the same exact time. So I think for me, that's the massive place. The one difference that I found between WhatsApp group and Clubhouse, in the WhatsApp group, I find that you're able to, I get more misinformation in a WhatsApp group than on Clubhouse, because people post so many things and so many attachments on WhatsApp without many people pushing back. On Clubhouse, if you say something as crazy as getting a vaccine means you're going to get a chip in your body, someone in the room is going to push back and say, no, that's not true, or where did you get that information? So it's a much more instant space where you're going to be engaging with people there. So I see there's another question here. It says, you said that it might change who we see as a journalist on platforms like Clubhouse. What do you think is important to train the people who will be in the role of journalism to moderate meaningful dialogue in this space? And I think for me, the answer to that is really that last part of the question. How you train people who will be in the role to moderate these meaningful conversation, right? And it's true. Moderation doesn't just come naturally, right? You need to be able to really identify what's true and what's not. Part of that involves a lot of things: being able to read, being well informed, and really having a value for truth. I often say that there's a reason why around the world journalism is seen as the fourth estate, right? It's a crucial component to survival and existence of society, right? And it's crucial to informing the public so that they can participate in their processes, right? So I think it is incredibly important to be able to train people who can moderate conversation, but I don't think that's just about Clubhouse. Again, I'm not so convinced that Clubhouse is going to be around a year or two from now, right? Because I think there are many audio apps that are coming up. Clubhouse numbers have been declining since the apex of COVID, right, a few months ago. So it's been going down. We're going to have another space, right? We're going to have people in virtual spaces having these same type of conversation. So then now the question is not to train someone on how to moderate on Clubhouse. The issue is about how to teach someone how to moderate conversations, period, right? On how to be able to unearth the truth and how to be able to push back when people are hiding the facts or how they're telling things that are not true. I think for me, that's the bigger issue. If you focus on Clubhouse and you train somebody just on how to be a good moderator on Clubhouse, they're going to be unemployed when Clubhouse stops. So I don't think that's really what it's about. I think it's really just about, again, it's about the fundamentals of good journalism. I don't think those are going to change.
Thank you so much, Tutaleni. We'd like to hear from the participants, what their takeaway was from the first day of the conference. Perhaps, Tutaleni, and I don't know if you were present since the beginning this morning, but what was your biggest takeaways from day one of the conference? And then we'll have
I hope it's clear for everybody. I think Nina might be experiencing some technical difficulties, but I think the exercise that she's intended, as her face is so beautifully frozen on the screen, is to maybe go around to all the participants and just share what is something that has stuck out for you that will be a takeaway from day one. Tutaleni, I think we were supposed to start with you. Let's go start with you giving us maybe your takeaway. Some of you guys can even share a call of action, something that you might alter or change in the way that you approached your career up until this conference.
I was not here for the whole session because it's only about 4 a.m. here for me, so it was a little bit early to be here for the whole process. But for the part when I came in, I think the biggest takeaway here is to figure out how to make use of the tools to serve your needs. It's not about changing your whole practice to fit the tool, because the tools change, right? My day-to-day is in educational technology, and one of the things that we usually say is that there's an old American saying that for someone who has a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Because if that's the only thing that you have, you want to use that hammer to nail down every little thing. So the goal is not to just have hammer, is to also have a much wider toolkit that you can pull from. And tools change. Clubhouse is the new hot app now. But before that, Facebook was what we all ran to, right? We still run to Facebook. TikTok is still there. I use TikTok even for teaching and everything else. So the goal is not just to really fixate on one tool, but really to be clear on what your mission is. What is it that you're trying to do? What is your aim? What is your fundamental? That for me really is is the most crucial, important thing to take away here. And I love that that this conversation is being had about what can we do with these tools, because I really think if you don't take up space, someone else will take up a space. I started off initially with my slide intentionally with the idea that innovations come from a need, right? We have needs that we have to meet, and those needs are addressed by certain innovations. And an innovation does not have to be a technology. An innovation can just be a new idea, or it could be a new way of using an old tool. So I think really the key here is to take up the space. Clubhouse has multiple rooms, right? For example, the Namibia House have over 12,000 people who are signed up for it. And anyone who's a member can go in there and open up a room. Why not have every Friday a space for wrap up for stories that happen in the week, gathering together all the different journalism from around the world, from around Namibia and from everywhere else, to be able to come in and tell stories from their perspective. So I think really the takeaway for me here is let's make sure we stay true to the fundamentals, and let's take up our space.
Thank you very much for that, and also thank you for your presentation.
Siveza iqiniso, sivuselela ukuthembeka.